Okay, well, welcome to the latest edition of our environmental career series. And today we're going to be focusing on how law and the environment come together. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Harriet Hall, who is a geography graduate from Cambridge. Harriet trained and qualified as a lawyer at Herbert Smith Freehills, and she was there for nearly 4 years before she moved to the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, which is part of the Government Legal Department, sometimes known as Defra, probably more commonly known, and has been an environment lawyer there since December 2023. So, very warm welcome, Harriet. Thank you so much for giving up your valuable time for us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So, I'd like to just start off by helping the people watching this to understand a bit about your background. I've alluded to a couple of things there, but in terms of your education and your training, and perhaps how you found yourself going from geography into law. So, over to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Just in terms of my background, as you've said, I'm currently an environmental lawyer at the Government Legal Department, and they advise across all of the government departments. But I, in particular, am stationed in Defra, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I studied geography for my undergraduate degree at Cambridge, and after graduating, my first job was actually, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do, and I took an administrative role at the British Antarctic Survey's office in Cambridge. And during this time, I was applying, I decided that law was the route that I wanted to take, and I was applying for legal training contracts in the evenings. I secured a training contract at Herbert Smith Freehills, and they're an international private practice corporate law firm, and they sponsored me through the law conversion course, which you have to do if you haven't studied undergrad law, and then through the legal practice course. So it was about 18 months of study in total. And after law school, I joined HSF as a trainee. That was just a week before the pandemic began, which introduced its own set of challenges for sure. And during my training, I did I tried to kind of focus my seats on environment as much as I could in the type of law firm that I was at. So I did a seat in energy litigation, real estate and planning, and construction, and a client secondment as well. And then I qualified into the real estate team, where I worked there for nearly 2 years as a lawyer before I moved across to the government. So I think the whole way through my study and career to date, I've been kind of motivated by a passion for nature and for wanting to do some meaningful work to address the climate and biodiversity crises. So I think environmental law was probably always where I wanted to end up. I guess the positives and negatives of a geography undergraduate degree are its broad scope. There's great things about it, but also it doesn't lend itself naturally to any particular career direction. But my dissertation when I was at university had a strong focus on law and policy. So that sparked my interest in pursuing a legal career. When I was at HSF in private practice, I found the work was really interesting. It was fascinating, but I felt a bit maybe disconnected from my environmental passions just due to the nature of the work that I was doing there. So that was what led me to explore other options and eventually transition to my current role in government. I feel that the work I do now has perhaps a more meaningful impact, and it's particularly exciting because it has a very policy driven focus, which as an ex-geographer turned lawyer, I find personally super exciting. And you get very unique opportunities as a government lawyer to actually draft legislation, and a lot of what you're doing is completely uncharted territory, and trying to shape policy decisions while also minimizing legal risks. So yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating, and I get to do a range of different types of law now. So I'm doing environmental law primarily, but also public law and human rights. So yeah, I really love it there. Uh, yeah, I can have a think about a typical day. I normally start the day with a meeting with my manager, who manages a wider team of four, and sometimes we have a group team meeting. Um, there's so many different areas that Defra do in terms of policy, and there's a lot of sub teams. So we tend to work very closely in small teams on very specific areas. So my team does chemicals and fertilizers work primarily. So yeah, we'll have a team meeting, normally discuss our priorities for the week, manage the workloads that we have, and also just discuss any more challenging questions that we're tackling at that time. Um, I often have calls as well on a typical day with policy teams. We call them our clients because we are technically kind of externally advising them as lawyers. So usually we're providing specific legal advice or just listening in on their calls and jumping in and offering legal input where we're needed. Yeah, I might, I normally get a chance to actually have lunch and go out, and depending on the workload I've got on a given week, I might squeeze a gym class in at the office. And then normally my afternoons are spent doing a bit more deep dive stuff, I would say. So I might analyse legal risk for submissions, which are advice notes that get sent to ministers. So, for example, a Defra minister might need to take a decision on something, and if it's their statutory role to do so, and it's the lawyer's job to assess whether that decision could be legally challenged, and relevant and irrelevant factors that need to be taken into account in the decision to mitigate legal risk of challenge. And I might also be asked by my manager to conduct kind of deep dive research on various legal issues. So recently I did a project looking into what duties the government has under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which was really interesting to look into. Okay, that's an interesting question. I think one challenge, big challenge that I see in environmental law, particularly, is that the largest environmental issues that we're facing and our clients are facing, such as climate change and biodiversity loss, to take the biggest two, are accelerating so rapidly. So I think it's going to be a challenge, and it's an issue that we need to keep up with the evolving scientific understanding around these issues, and the law needs to support some of the larger systemic changes that are probably going to be needed to address them. I also think we need to think about these big picture issues in the context of our client duties as lawyers. So what do we do as lawyers if our client is taking action that is polluting or depleting nature? We need to reconcile our lawyer's duty to act in our client's best interest with perhaps the duty to act in the wider public's interests, and how the wider public interests probably relate back to your client's individual interests too, to an extent. The Law Society has recently told us that all lawyers are now climate lawyers. So really no lawyer should be unaffected by climate risk. It's not just environmental lawyers that need to be thinking about this now. I think to think about government law and environmental law in the government in particular as well, a key issue that springs to mind is that after Brexit, the UK lost a lot of the enforcement architecture and the technical expertise that we had when we were part of the EU, particularly on environment. And so I think a key challenge over the next few years in particular will be establishing a new kind of equilibrium in our relationship with the EU. and developing our own robust domestic environmental protections. And I think that will be a big challenge for us. It will be a lot of work, but something that needs to be done. Yeah, of course. So yes, alongside 10 other junior lawyers, I co-run Legal Voices for the Future, or LVF, that's in my spare time outside of work. And it's a free collaborative learning forum, and it's aimed at educating and empowering a new generation of lawyers on the climate and ecological crises and the kind of social aspects that come with this also. Um, I think our view and the view of our founders was that currently legal education doesn't sufficiently address these issues. So our mission is to try and fill that gap and help young lawyers feel confident speaking up when perhaps in their work important planetary and societal issues are being downplayed or ignored. And so we host monthly hybrid knowledge sessions, which are led by our members who might have a passion or specialism in a particular subtopic. So we've had previous sessions on the rights of nature and the international wildlife trade and greenwashing. So we really do cover all sorts of things. And we maintain a LinkedIn page and YouTube channel. So you can actually go on there and access recordings of our previous events. And of course, we'd love for anyone watching this to join one of our sessions if this is something you're interested in. Yeah, definitely. I mean, yes, of course, going to things like Legal Voices for the Future and events like that is in my biased perspective, a really great first step. But I think just more generally, not just Legal Voices for the Future, I would advise people to network and try and seek out opportunities to speak with like-minded individuals on this. There's a huge wealth of content out there and discussions happening in the environmental law sector. So I would just say, attend as many events as you can, read blogs, try and stay updated on environmental news, which hopefully shouldn't feel like too much of a burden if it's something that you're passionate and interested in. I think building that passion up and maintaining positivity is quite critical in a field as challenging as this, because sometimes the scale of the issues being tackled is so huge that it can be a little bit daunting. So any kind of passion and enthusiasm that you build, I think, will really stand out to interviewers, and being able to demonstrate that in your spare time you've been, keeping on top of current events and developments. I think just secondly, I would say be open to opportunities, and don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone. I think I've always had a real kind of imposter syndrome with law in particular, as I didn't study it for my undergraduate degree. And I think the law needs more people with varied backgrounds. I think it makes for better lawyers, and particularly environmental lawyers. And also, there's so many different opportunities to explore because these roles exist in so many different ways, so that you could go to a private firm, you could go to the government, you could go to NGOs, charities, in-house roles for businesses. So talk to people in these roles, understand the differences, and don't be afraid to try something new. If what you do at first isn't working for you, then don't be afraid to try something else. I mean, people thought I was crazy leaving private practice for a government role. My colleagues there did anyway, but it's the best decision I think that I've made for my career. So yeah, keep an open mind. My last piece of advice, I think, would be take your time. Building a career takes time, and I think it's very rare for anyone to get to their dream job straight away. but speed definitely isn't everything. My path into where I am now definitely wasn't linear. But as I say, all the varied experience I've gained along the way, I think has made me a stronger lawyer. So yeah, don't give up if you don't get there immediately. Just try and build and gain relevant experience where you can, and keep an eye out for opportunities.